Editor's note, the beginning of our podcast got cut off, and we are missing at least the first 4 or 5 minutes of us introducing the film. So that's mostly because I'm dumb and I didn't catch it due to a technical error, but don't worry, here comes me for a different intro and a segue. Welcome to May the Review Be With You with Nick and Joe. I'm Joe. Nick is also here, but this is from the future. So we'll segue into him pretty quick. Here's just the rundown of what this episode is. We're continuing our time travel draft. We are on Terminator 2 for our classic time travel category. It's Nick's pick. And right now, at this point in the podcast, I would have been stalling for my Judgment Day, the 15-second summary, but I'll let Nick explain.
Speaking of Judgment Day, Joe, there's something that you have to do, and it's a 15-second summary, my friend.
Yeah, no, I'm dreading this one.
This is a tough one because it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. All right, so for those of you who don't know, before every time Joe and I review a movie, one of us has to give a 15-second summary. We take turns. At the end, we grade each other. And Joe has the lovely capability today of being the person who has to give the summary. So without further ado, I'm going to count you in, and you have 15 seconds to review Terminator 2 Judgment Day. 3, 2, 1, go.
Future John Connor sends the T-800 back in time to stop the T-1000 from killing his past self. T-1000 is trying to ensure that Skynet happens and that the apocalypse happens and Skynet takes over. Sarah Connor meets up with the trio to try and stop the inevitable from happening, and they kill him. I think I got it.
You did it. You did pretty well. But whatever you were reading, you didn't finish it. So
I don't mean anything. I need to look out into like the void in order to like channel the summary.
Okay, that's fair. I'll give you that. Yeah, I think you covered pretty much. You covered a lot of the main points. You really didn't. You didn't really close the loop on the end there, but.
You know what? That's actually, I'm glad you said that, Nick, because that's actually one of my hot takes about this movie. But we'll get to that later.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and give you a B+ here for that 15-second summary. I think it's a pretty good score.
It, man. This is a long movie, and I was trying to think of like what's the shortest possible way you could just. All right, I'm just gonna mention all three main characters. T-800 good, T-1000 bad. That's it. That's the summary.
Oh man, yeah. Speaking of length, definitely, I was kind of shocked, with how old the movie is and with how long it was. Right, it had to have been one of the longer like feature films back then, right? In 1991.
It is, and it's. I'm glad we're talking about that because there's actually a famous like discussion from James Cameron talking about like the length of this movie, and specifically like he brings it up as a point of like the importance of editing. And the movie was like super long, and he's like, man, this is too long for a movie theater, and they were experimenting with ways to try and shorten it. And the way that they succeeded, I'll get into that much later here, but one of the famous experiments that they tried was they removed one frame I think it was per every 26 or something. And they were thinking, yeah, if we do that, that will ultimately remove like a few minutes of the film. But all it ended up doing was creating like this jumbled mess of like, they look like they were just jumping throughout the film. Like it looked like you were just opening and closing your eyes really fast. So it's one of those, it's his famous like discussion of like, that was the moment I realized that like every frame matters and editing is so important. Like, so yeah, the length of this movie has been a large discussion in film history.
Very interesting point. That's awesome. That's a great point. Anything stick out? Anything glaring you want to like talk about before we really get into it? I mean, we want to focus on time travel,
Yes. Okay,
obviously.
I
So
do. All right, I'm going right into it. Okay, so it's the
okay,
length. All right, so it's the solution for the length that I have a problem with. Okay, and like maybe the '90s was just different, right? Maybe you can't have, 3 hour end game movie that people are willing to stick around for. I don't believe that because before that they had Gone with the Wind, which had an intermission in its movie. Uh, but whatever. So their solution, I haven't actually seen like an official discussion on this. I am just assuming that this was their solution. So the beginning of the movie happens, right? And honestly, the beginning of the movie is done masterfully. I love that the T800 comes in, the T1000 comes in, and if you have any knowledge on Terminator 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the bad guy of that movie. So you see him, right? And he's beating people up. And this other cyborg shows up, or other machine rather, shows up and he dresses as a police officer, right? This is a great setup for you don't know who's good or bad, right?
yep.
And there's no nothing. You're just observing it as a viewer, right? This is a great directorial decision. I love it. About, I don't know, 30 40 minutes into the movie, we've already met Sarah Connor in this movie. And then like 45 minutes in the movie, all of a sudden we get Sarah Connor's like first narration out of nowhere. She just starts narrating. And you're like, wait, we didn't start with that. Why are we just narrating now? And then it occurred to me, we're narrating to save time. She's quickly walking us through important points, important emotional points, and then later like important discussions, and then at the very end, she's wrapping up like the plot points of the future. And like that's all it's being used for is to speed the movie up. And honestly, like when it first comes, it's so disruptive that I'm like, I hate this. I hate that they did that. Like this movie's
This is
awesome,
why
and I love this movie, but screw that.
this is why I love talking to you about movies because you notice things that like I don't, and it didn't occur to me how random the narration ends
It
up
is,
being. So
yeah.
it for me, I didn't notice like it was happening, and I acknowledged it was happening, and I was paying attention, but I didn't realize that it didn't start like that, and how distracting it can be to happen like 30 or 40 minutes in.
It's like a third of the movie way in. Like and like we'd already seen Sarah Connor. It's not like it
Yeah.
started when we were introduced to Sarah. It happens after they escape the mental ward.
Yeah, that's like super far in too. That's like
Mhm.
weirdly far in to start a narration aspect too, just to help like get all the details across.
I
Wow.
do say I will say like I think it speaks to the strengths of this movie that like that's one of the few weaknesses I will call out.
Right.
I do think
Yeah.
it's kind of a large one, but it's it's still like a great and solid movie, you know.
Yeah.
But that one does like I've never noticed that either, Nick. And like this time around, watching it like as an adult, it was like, what the hell? Like what? It reminded me of Spider-Man 3, where we've had Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man for 1 and 2, and then all of a sudden at the start of Spider-Man 3, same director, he's just narrating the story for some reason, like as if we've never been introduced. I'm Spider-Man. It's like, yeah, we freaking know. What are you talking about? Like, why are you narrating
Well,
now?
we're not going down a Spider-Man 3 rabbit hole because this would turn into a 10-hour podcast episode about why the movie is terrible and should have never been made. We're not going to do that episode. That's not the episode we're doing today. We're talking about Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and about the time travel specifically. So,
We should consider
speaking
that.
of time travel, well, at a later date, we'll talk about it. But that means we'd have to watch that movie again, and it's on my no watch list. So, anyway, um, moving on to time travel in Terminator 2, I will say, even though the movie was ahead of its time effects wise, rewatching it years down the road, the the special effects for how the time travel takes place is now in 2024 hysterical and slightly cringe. Especially like the orb that essentially like they like appear in this orb, which really is just like them being shot through space-time, creating a hole in like the fabric of reality, right? So that they can like travel back in time. And this hole destroys anything that it touches when it like appears in the present time. So like when T-800 shows up, you know, like he like disintegrates this semi truck or part of the semi truck because that's just where he appears. And then when T-1000 shows up, he disintegrates like the gate. It's like a perfect circle out of this gate. But it's like it, you know, it's just a little funny, and you know, that's what happens when you watch. But like then ahead of its time, really cool. But now you watch it and you're like, well, there are way better ways to do that. And if the technology was already that good, they probably could have figured out a way for him to like not have to destroy things when they get back into when they go back in time. So, but
Playing by Marty McFly and Back to the Future rules, I love that they destroy things when they just, you know, emerge into another time.
It's an old time travel movie thing. They just destroy stuff when they travel back in time.
Right, you gotta wreck something when you make the impact on the past.
But you know, yeah, that was
that we don't talk about the fact that, you know, like in Back to the Future, Doc Brown is so worried about like influencing the past, right? And then changing the future. But like every time they use the time machine, they run into something and destroy it. So like, is that not going to have somehow huge ramifications on the future? It could, more so than like, I don't know, like Doc reading a letter. Well, maybe not. Doc survived, so maybe not. That's a bad example. But you know what I mean? He's not worried about that.
I don't know.
I'm no time chronologist.
Plus, yeah, and the barn scene is a great example too, when like the whole family is just like, what the heck is this alien in our barn? Like, how does that not disrupt anything? Right, yeah. So ridiculous. Who knows? But that's the other thing too, about this movie, right? Like both like the Resistance and the computer, you know, the AI, Skynet, both send back a Terminator. But they will both only send back one, which, you know, part of these things are just for movie purposes too, right? But I don't know. I guess I found it interesting that like the Resistance figured out how to send one back too in this case, right? And then also they explain later that like John Connor was able to reprogram T-800 to make him good and make him on their side, which is a really cool like plot point in the film, right? That's completely different from the T1, so I thought it was pretty sweet. Yeah,
we haven't talked about him yet, but like this is the movie that I believe catapulted Arnold Schwarzenegger into like super stardom. And he's awesome in this movie, man.
Oh yeah,
like
he's great.
I understand like the acting direction he's given is just, hey, be emotionless and be like robot. And I don't know how hard that is, but like, hey, he does it, and like he gets that tearful goodbye at the end. So like, you know what? Bravo.
But here's the cool thing about the roboticness. I was watching the Netflix documentary of him. You know, he's like a 4-episode thing with about Schwarzenegger. Like it's his documentary. Like he's in the whole thing and talking about it. And he's talking about Terminator and about when he got cast. And a lot of the roboticness was actually like a suggestion by him. He was like, this guy is an AI, like he's a computer program. His movements should be more robotic. And so he like, I think a lot of that was him actually coming up with it on his own. Like, oh no, that this is what he should be. Which when I saw that, I was like, that's awesome. Like that he's actually thinking of ways to make the character better and improved. So that was like a really cool
seasoned actor. Who's willing to explore a character that way.
So I got a kick out of that. And so you just triggered my memory with bringing that roboticness up. So it wasn't, I don't know if it was so much a Cameron direction as it was Arnold being like, this is what it should be like.
You know, good. I don't want to give Cameron any credit. He gets enough already.
Oh my God. Joe's a James Cameron hater.
I honestly don't even know why. I really don't. I like most of his movies. I for some reason I just feel bitter toward him. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, that's okay.
Do you know Do you know the famous oh my God, what's his name? The famous astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. You know the famous
Yeah.
Neil deGrasse Tyson James Cameron story?
I don't think so.
Oh man. Okay, so Neil deGrasse Tyson watches Titanic and he loves pointing out when things in astronomy are incorrect.
Ah.
And in Titanic, when the boat is going down in the night sky, he can see the stars, and he's like, those wouldn't have been the stars in the sky that night. And he's like, I'm gonna tell James that. And like one day, like in like I don't know how many years later, they find themselves at a dinner together, and like he's so excited to like bring this up, and he's like, James, your movie was pretty good, but Night Sky, all wrong, my friend, all wrong. And James Cameron's like, oh my God, that's crazy. I can't believe we messed that up. Can you imagine how much more money we would have made if we got the night sky right? I don't like him. That's hilarious.
That's so funny.
Right? Like that's so great.
And
And Neil
depending on
deGrasse
how he
Tyson,
said it,
he's like,
yeah,
I walked away with the L on that one somehow.
yeah, that's such an L. That's so funny. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, come on, you can't. One of the highest grossing films of all time. You can't complain about that. That's ridiculous. Come on, Neil. Get it together, buddy. Unbelievable. All right.
Nick, I know you are a huge, a big fan of this movie.
Yeah.
Tell me something I don't know about this movie.
All right. So I wonder if you noticed this because it was glaring to me. And I couldn't find anything in a quick search online if this was done purposely. But I have a hunch that there are some similarities between the scene at the end when Schwarzenegger's Terminator, has been like just completely ravaged by the T-1000, right? Like he's got his arm chopped off, his face is half robot, and he's on the ground and he's just like crawling with one arm, basically. Just crawling on the ground with one arm after being like ripped to shreds. Well, that looks an awful lot like Anakin Skywalker at the end of Revenge of the Sith when he's been destroyed by Obi-Wan and he's missing limbs and he's crawling on the ground. It was just like such a glaring similarity that my first thought was, man, did George Lucas steal that scene like when they filmed Revenge of the Sith from James Cameron? Because like it's so like it's the same thing. It's so close together. I couldn't find anything quickly online, but there are some people who have, I think, also made the connection and put some clips together.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know if there's been a quote from George Lucas saying that. I haven't dug deep enough yet, though, either. I didn't have
But I
enough
mean,
time.
like the fact that
But
you're not the only one who's picking up on
right,
that's gotta be
yeah,
something.
like so pretty glaring. So I figured that would be a fun little thing to bring up.
I do. I love that. You know what? The more I think about it, there's no way. There's no way it's a coincidence. He drew
Right?
inspiration from that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially because
That's
like
gotta be great.
the arm's missing on Terminator, the arm is missing on Anakin. They've both just been like got their asses kicked, and they're both on the ground like crawling basically with one arm. Like it's like,
They're both.
and their faces are like just burnt and on fire,
Right.
basically. Like
And they're both like in environments where there's like lava.
lava. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, like molten lava. Like,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
sure. We've got a
Those things are weirdly similar.
yeah, and let's also talk about how like we just have a liquid nitrogen truck all of a sudden makes its way into a molten lava factory.
Hey, I don't know what goes on in those factories. All right, I'm no chemist. Maybe that happens every day.
The 90s. The 90s.
I do have one of my favorite practical effects from this movie is so T-1000. He has that very like mercurial look to him where he becomes like liquid metal, right?
Yeah, super
And
weird.
it's super weird. I really love it. There's this moment toward the end of the movie. It's after the liquid nitrogen thing where he freezes him, right? And the lava it's some kind of fires nearby, and it's like heating up the ice, so he's able to
Yeah.
like reform. How they did that was this is crazy to me. they actually poured mercury on the ground, right? Actual mercury. And they started just blowing it around with a leaf blower, right? To just like have it move. And then for the movie, they just played that footage in reverse to make it look like it's reassembling itself.
Oh,
That's
that's
brilliant,
awesome.
right? That's
That's
such a
awesome.
great idea. Except for the
I
mercury
love.
part. That seems really unsafe.
Yeah, it seems. Well, hopefully it was a controlled environment.
Ah, yes, we know how safe Hollywood tends to be.
That's a very cool practical effect, though. I love stuff like that. That's fantastic. Um, all right, let's get into it. Let's talk
Let's
about
get
time travel.
into it. All right, but before we do, let's take
Yeah,
a quick word from our sponsor. All right, and welcome back. As Nick just stated,
stated.
time travel for this movie. Okay, Nick, would you do us the honors? How does the time travel of this movie work?
Well, that's a great question. Now that I'm really thinking about it, because we don't actually know how it works, and this might be this will hurt my score, of course, which will make Joe happy
Oh yeah,
because
no, I thought about it after finishing this film.
so far my movies have had pretty good scores from a time travel mechanic perspective, and Joe's had a couple on the board
Had some
with not so good
stinkers.
explanations. And unfortunately, I picked this one for because I loved it, but the time travel information is not ideal. We don't know how they're time traveling. We just know that it's been invented in some future where Skynet has taken over. And we know that they are able to send back one Terminator. But we also know somehow the Resistance also has learned how to time travel. Or they learned that, or they were able to infiltrate, however, Skynet is time traveling and use their machinery once. So we just know that it's possible. But we don't know what the actual like mechanic is. We don't know if they're time traveling. It doesn't look like they're time traveling in anything because based on the beginning of the movie, they're just like my thought process is they're being shot through like a vacuum in space time and just like as their bodies, and then they're just appearing safely. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that they're robots essentially, so they can withstand the whatever force of space time is being pushed on them, so that they're able to like withstand that. I don't know if a human could actually do that based on this particular form of time travel, but again, we don't have a lot of information there. We also don't know if they can go back to where they came from. It doesn't seem so. It seems like they're not able to be pulled back. Where like in a 12 Monkeys, they're able to be. He was able to be in the movie 12 Monkeys. He's able to go back and forth. And in Back to the Future, there's the DeLorean where you're able to go back and forth. But in this movie, they're sending two robots back in time, and it seems like they're not able to go back to the future. That's the time travel, basically, of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Let's talk about the problems with that.
So I'm glad you brought up 12 Monkeys because, like, yeah, this time travel feels weirdly similar to 12
It's
Monkeys,
similar,
right?
yeah.
Where, like, you really don't
Right,
get to. I mean, you get to see a little bit more than maybe you do in 12
right,
Monkeys, but, like, yeah, they just kind of appear back, right?
right.
But something that you brought up that I actually think I kind of dig about this movie, about its time travel, right? So you brought up the fact that it's a one-way trip, right?
Right.
And I think that's super interesting because, like, in the first movie, we know that Skynet sends T-800 back in time to kill Sarah Connor, right? To kill Sarah
Yeah.
Connor. But by doing that, it's actually it's creating itself, right? Because it leaves the microchip, it leaves the hand, and it's this bootstrap paradox, right? It's very 12 Monkeys, actually, that it creates
Right.
itself. There's a loop that ends up happening, or a causality loop, right? Um, and in this movie, we kind of explore that a little bit further, right? With T-800 and then T-1000 coming into, like, the loop now, right? Or I guess, like, we're outside the loop, and it's the path to create the Skynet future, which
Right.
appears to be only slightly different than what was originally there. So the future was altered, right? Okay, now to the point of what you were saying with it's a one-way trip. And actually, I didn't even think about that until you brought it up. But something I really like about this is so do you remember in Avengers Endgame? Uh, it's amazing how often we quote this movie for the time travel draft. Um, but Bruce Banner starts talking about how like the Back to the Future, doesn't make sense. You can't like, do the grandfather thing and like accidentally like, erase yourself from the present because you've returned to the past, but from your perspective, that is your now new present, right?
Hmm.
So I like the fact that they can't go back to the future. In
Right.
this universe, the way time works, it's just one singular path, right?
Hmm.
And they can't go back to their future because it doesn't exist anymore, right?
Hmm. Right.
They're just in this timeline now. And I guess if you're Skynet, like you're sending something back and you've learned, oh, well, maybe it didn't learn this. I don't know. I don't know if it has omniscient
Right.
knowledge, but it created itself, right? And if you keep sending things back, I don't know how that works. But anyway, um, anyway, we know that their future has been ensured by Skynet. Now we're in this new path, right? Where T-800 is here, and they're trying to save John. They save John. Both machines are destroyed, and presumably the future has been saved because there's no way for Skynet to be created anymore. The loop has been collapsed, right? I have a problem with this, but overall, I actually think the path sort of makes sense. Right? Like,
Yeah. The the path makes sense, and it is very cool that it's a one-way trip. And it's the first movie we reviewed in the time travel draft that is a one-way trip, I believe. Right?
yeah,
I
it
think
is.
that everything else has some kind of loop or ending or traveling back to where they came from situation going on. Um, except maybe Groundhog Day, but that's a slightly different because it's more like a zillion branch timelines rather
Yeah.
than like a
Well,
one-way
the time
trip.
travel in there is absolutely insane.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really cool that it's a one-way trip, and especially when you kind of think about it like long-term, rise, right? Like it's like, okay, well, they destroy both Terminators at the end. They get rid of all the evidence, presumably. So then, you know, what happens to the Skynet that existed that sent them back? And, we don't get an answer, obviously, in T2. We kind of get an answer because they remade, or not remade, but they made a third Terminator movie in like 2003. So they did continue the storyline. So we kind of get an answer. The answer there is, you know, that it all that Terminator 2 Judgment Day did was delay Judgment Day. That Judgment Day still comes. That's the Terminator 3 essentially like plot
So
line.
this you just hit my biggest problem with this franchise. Okay.
Right.
So okay. So the end of this movie, right? The one that you and I just saw,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little ambiguous, right? It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can learn the value of life like these machines, and then it doesn't really address anything. And then we know that there's Terminator 3 and then Genesis, and I think I have that out of order actually, but 3 is something else and then Genesis, right? Uh, but there's an alternate version or alternate ending of this movie, right? Where we see Sarah Connor like 70 years in the future, and she's like an old lady, and she talks about how like Judgment Day came and went, and we all lived through it. We had saved the future, and then she says the line that we know, like the if machines can learn to value life, maybe we can too, right? So there's a script where like T2 is just the end of it. It's just over, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. So like, what the
Well,
hell? Are there two different timelines now? Like, what is this?
well, technically yes, and the first timeline is Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, and that's the James Cameron Terminator timeline and universe because James Cameron was like, "Nah, I told the story. I'm done. I ain't coming back for number 3." So it wasn't James Cameron didn't come back. So, but
John said he wasn't
Schwarzenegger did.
hurt.
Yeah, but Schwarzenegger did. if I'm not mistaken, Cameron was not involved in the future ones, so that could be part of
That's
part of
probably a good move.
the issue there. Yeah, he had bigger fish to fry. At that point, he was already writing Avatar. He was just waiting for the effects to catch up. So, um, but yeah, definitely, when you think about Terminator 3 and all the others that came, it kind of makes it a little disappointing from this perspective, from the how Terminator 2 finishes, because it was so open ended. But
Like it also blows away like what I was saying about like yeah, they can't go back to the future because that doesn't exist anymore. It didn't create another timeline. It's the same timeline. It's just different now, right?
right,
Uh
yeah,
but like not with those two endings and the continuation of Judgment Day later, like the other sequels of this movie kind of almost ruin this movie a little bit. Um
right,
so I'm not going to hold that against this movie. I'm just holding it against the franchise.
right, yeah. I agreed, agreed. Movie wise though, like obviously, just what a kick ass action film, action
Oh,
sci-fi
yeah.
film, time travel, just badass. Um, can we talk? I mean, we definitely want to talk a little bit more about the time travel, and we'll get into scores in a second. But I forgot how like gruesome some of these scenes were in this movie. Like the nuclear scene when they give you like the
Ooh,
example of
yeah.
what like the whole like the nuclear warheads going off.
Right, where she's
Like
having like
that was
a
so,
premonition.
which is premonition. Oh my gosh. I was like, this is like, I was like, you could cut in footage of this and footage from like Oppenheimer and like cut them together. Like, there's got to be something you can cut in together. Just to, I don't know why obviously I thought of Oppenheimer when that scene happened because it's just like recent. But man, that was just gruesome. I was like, this is kind of gross. Like, and then they've got like the skeleton just still hanging on the gate. I'm like, what are we doing? 1991, let's go. Like, it's so ridiculous. Like that, like that is
It's a
not how
weird
it would work.
combination. It's a weird combination of like really silly and also like horrifically gruesome.
Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect thing. It's like hilariously gruesome. Like what? Like what are we talking about? Like half of my notes are me laughing because of how silly some of the gruesome parts look. Anyway,
Yeah,
I had to bring that
Tarantino.
up because it was so weird. It was so weird. I had to bring it up. But yeah, like from a time travel perspective, obviously, like we don't have a lot of like mechanic. Like we don't know what the time travel mechanism is or what the tool is, right? Like there's not like a car or a machine
Well,
necessarily. It just
we know it's there's a
there's
machine, right?
lightning.
Yeah, right.
There's
They
like
don't.
lightning in a circular thing that appears that
Right,
destroys
right.
anything that it touches, but it doesn't keep the hole in the ozone layer ripped. The air is still there after it disappears, and I guess the machine is the machine that's traveling uh,
Like it's
through
almost like a
time.
I like to think of it so it's the time displacement machine. I forgot if that's mentioned in this movie or a different one. But I like to think of it like it's a cannon, right? And it just
Yeah,
shoots you. It's just
yeah,
boom, like right
yeah.
into the past.
That's exactly what it feels like. It is. It feels like it's a cannon, except like they're not crashing when they land when they get to where they're going. They like
I mean a
perfectly.
little.
Well, they're crashing in the sense that like wherever they like populate is just like they're just if they're touching anything, it's
Hmm.
destroyed. But
Right.
they themselves are like landing perfectly, and there's no like issue with how they're uh appearing in the new timeline. Basically, uh,
I do have one time travel
I don't know.
question, and I forgot if this movie like he came up with a reason for it or not. Do we know why John knows to send the T-800 into the past to stop the T-1000? Because like if you think about it, it's so for the present, like the way it works, T-800 shows up just a little bit before T-1000, right? And then the movie happens, right? And eventually both of them are destroyed, right? But John is saved. But old John, like, how did he know that the T-1000 was being sent back, and they were like, "Oh snap, we gotta send back our own killer android to kill that android, right, and save me." Like, do we know why he knew that? And also, like, if he did, how did he do that? Because the second the T1000 goes back, like, doesn't that reality not exist anymore?
These questions are too big for the scope of this movie and the information that we have given to us.
Come on, James. Come
No,
on.
it's a fascinating question, and it's one of the big problems with the time travel mechanism in this film because we don't have an explanation. They did not give us an explanation for why John knew that he had to send T800 back because T1000 was sent. My only thought process there is since clearly the Resistance somehow knows that they can time travel, that knows how to time travel as well. There's some sort of system that tells you something has time traveled and to where. That Skynet and the Resistance both can see. So
Right.
when Skynet sends back T1000, John just automatically knows it based on whatever monitoring systems are going on.
John invented TimeNet. He was like, oh, they sent someone. Send our own guy. Send our own guy.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's doing yet, but send our own guy.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Because I don't think there was any part in the movie where like T800 was like, yeah, John remembered this happening, so he knew when to send me back. You know, there was no like loop situation kind of like past thought happening in the present or anything like that.
You think about it from that perspective, the time travel in this movie is a little messier than it was in the first movie.
Yeah, unless in the first movie, unless in the first movie there was more information given, or it's implied that like, well, no, because the second movie happens because of what happens in the first movie. So never mind. There wouldn't have been. Yeah, never mind.
Oh wait. I guess actually no. I forgot about Kyle Reese because Kyle in the first movie is sent back. So it's a similar issue.
Yeah, it's a similar issue, but like what I was gonna say is like, yeah, Kyle Reese could have told them that like, but they sent Terminator back, and the Resistance sent Kyle Reese to make sure that Kyle Reese would have John with Sarah Connors. Super weird paradox there. But like that happens, and the reason that T2 happens is because they kill the Resistance wins and kills and gets rid of the Terminator in Terminator 1. So then Skynet sends a more improved Terminator years later when John Connors is a kid to try to stifle him in that moment. So like there's no like when Kyle Reese goes back in Terminator 1, he doesn't know that Skynet's going to send a T1000, 8 years later, 15 years later, or whatever this number is. So yeah, we just don't know why. We don't know how the Resistance knows that there's been a T1000 sent back in time. We don't know who invented time travel, assuming it was Skynet. So my score's going to be really low for that.
So no, wait, the last part we do know. Skynet did invent time travel. We do know that.
Okay.
Skynet is responsible for time travel. How? I don't freaking know. That's never explained.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. What's next? What else you got?
I think oh wait, no wait. There is one more thing. Super quick. Just a funny hole in the movie that I'm like looking at, and I'm like, why? This is so small, but like I have to point it out. So T1000, that moment where, admittedly, this is a badass moment, where T1000 has Sarah Connor pinned, right, and he's got like his needle finger like through her, and so wrong. But anyway, he's got like the other finger like ready to like stab her through the eye, and he's like, call John, and she's like, fuck you, like. Great, right? Super badass. Actually, we haven't talked about Sarah enough in this movie. Sarah rules.
Yeah,
Sarah rules.
Total badass. Yeah, total badass.
Anyway, why'd he do that? He can mimic her voice. In fact, he does it like what? 5 minutes later when he transforms into her. Like,
yeah.
Why'd he say that?
So the second that literally a scene later, he starts mimicking her voice.
Yeah.
My thought was, maybe he needed her to speak directly to him while he was actually to actually record it and process how her voice sounds rather than like just picking it up from her like yelling during the fight scenes throughout the rest of the film because they hadn't really had a one-on-one
Mm,
connection yet. So that was my thought. That was like she spoke enough words when they were face to face for him to like process the tone of her voice and to be able to mimic it later. I just thought it was really funny that the very next scene we get her looking for John, where we're just all like, we're like, yeah, okay, obviously it's the
right.
T-1000 because Sarah's like about to bleed out on the floor in the other room. But
It,
like, you know,
it
her
really
son
feels
obviously, yeah, it does. But her son doesn't know. But it's like, as an audience member, it's a little infuriating because you're just like, I mean, okay, the kid's smart though. You expect me to believe the kid? I guess it makes sense that he thinks it's his mom, but
right.
also, come on, it's like this kid like is super smart based on all the things he's already been able to do in this film.
What
Like,
makes it T1000 is smart too. As soon as John turns the corner and then it's there, why doesn't it kill him? Like, why is it
right,
waiting? Like,
right,
come closer, little one. It's like, no, you
yeah,
got your stretchy fingers. Just do it.
yeah, exactly. So there, you know, suspenseful moments being built by Mr. Cameron. Anyway, all right,
I'll give you
let's.
the defense of the voice though. I'll give you that.
Yeah, thank you. That's the only thing
Yeah.
I could think of. Um, yeah. Are we doing scores?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's score time.
Great.
So, if you don't mind, I would like to go first. I think I usually go second.
Yeah, great.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
you go first.
yeah. So, this movie's awesome. Oh yeah, just as far as scores go, just as a reminder, we're going to score out of 5, and we're scoring in 3 different categories. Overall, how is the movie? 2, what or how did the time travel mechanic do in its own film, right? If it worked well, or if it broke rules, or if it was sloppy. And then, of course, how did this movie do in the category it was drafted in? And as a reminder, we're talking about classic time travel movies. Okay, okay. Overall, I'm gonna give this movie. I'm gonna give this movie a 4. So just solid 4. It's a fun movie. It's got some holes, little tiny ones. And the narration thing really does make me mad. But overall, this movie is a staple in cinema history,
Yep.
and it's super fun.
Yep.
What about
This
you?
is a respectable score. So overall, I'm actually going to go a little lower. I'm going to give it a 3.8.
Oh,
3.8. Unbiased, my own movie pick. 3.8 just because, I think it was a little long. You pointing out the narration thing like blew my mind because like you're right about it. And yeah, slightly long. And like I like to grade movies based on like rewatchability because I love to
mm,
rewatch movies. And it's not that I wouldn't rewatch this film, I would, but because of the length and while the effects were ahead of its time and some of the and really awesome, now with how spoiled we are, sometimes it can make me like not hit play on an older movie because I'm like, but the effects are a little cheesy now. Like, I'd rather rewatch Endgame because it's just badass, that kind of thing. So that's the main reason I'm going to give it a 3.8. But definitely, like, that's a good score though. Like, 3.8 out of 5 is like better than a lot of movies. So, anyway, that's
nice.
what I'm going with.
All right, time travel. Yeah, okay. So this is tricky, right? Because like as we discussed, uh, so it's the harder you look at the time travel of this movie, the wonkier it gets,
Yeah.
right? Um, okay, so I'm gonna try and be as fair as possible with this. Okay, so the time travel it lays out, the mechanic is it seems simple. It seems like it's just a one shot into the past, and you're gonna change the thing that you're gonna change, and that's it, right? And supposedly, if you don't take the other sequels into account, we do see that actually play out. It plays out the way that it says it's supposed to. Uh, but as far as like why the time travel even happens to begin with, that doesn't make any sense really, and there's no good explanation for it, uh, other than Skynet invented it. But like the Resistance has it, and like they knew to like send back. There's just so many questions, right?
Yep.
Um, so I'm gonna be a little lower here, but it's not gonna be as bad as Back to the Future. I'm gonna go 2.5 here.
Wow. Okay. Nice. I was expecting it to be a little lower. Not gonna lie. Um, yeah. For me, it's so tough. Like we don't. This is this. It feels like it's one of the worst ones that we've done. Like I think Groundhog Day is probably the worst so far,
Probably.
right? And Back to the Future is really bad as well. But Back to the Future had a really cool like tool for time travel, so that like helped its score, right? Like the DeLorean
Most
is like the coolest way to time travel ever, right? It's like most stylish way to time travel. Great. The thing that this movie has going for it is that it's a one-way trip, which I think is super cool. So it helps give it a point or two. But we have no other info time travel wise. We know Skynet invented it. That's it. Like Skynet invented it. We can send machines back, but as far as we know, each group of people can only send back one machine, and then that's it. We have no and then it just like shoots them through space time, and wherever they end up, like there's destruction of like their surrounding area. So this like creates like a black hole for a moment, but they're able to time travel through it. Super weird. No explanation. Like I have to give it like a 2. It's like a 2. It just is nothing. There's no info.
Do you remember what you did Back to the Future?
No, but I'm pretty sure it was higher than a 2 because the DeLorean is so cool.
Yeah, I think we actually
And
went
like,
reverse.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I think I gave to the Future a 2 and you gave it a 2.5, and that here we
Yeah.
are in reverse.
Right. Well, but like that's the thing. Like at least with Back to the Future, because of we see the DeLorean, we have information. Like, oh, you know you can. This is how you can set to travel to the past. You can set to travel to the future. You can put the dates in. Like you have like information on how
Yeah.
to. We don't. The science doesn't work, but you have information on how. Here we have no information on how it's done. The science doesn't work because we don't know what it even is. Right? Because like if it's a black hole that like they're going through and like you're essentially creating a black hole for a moment, like you would think that anything would get sucked into that in that moment before the black hole closes. So they have a technology to like open up a hole in space time without like doing any other destruction except for like whatever might be in that quick little vicinity. Like it just makes no sense. It should probably be lower than a 2, but I've already given the score, so it's a 2.
You've convinced me going lower. I'm now 2.3. If you want to go lower, you can.
No, I shouldn't allow you to update your score after I've convinced you. After you've already given a score, but I'll allow it for this one time.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll
keep it.
commit.
Yeah.
I'll commit.
Okay, commit to
I
your
regret it.
terrible.
I'll regret it.
Yeah,
I was too
you should have
generous.
given it. Yeah, by you doing a 2.5, it left me being like, well, I won't give my own movie a too bad of a score. I'll definitely be lower though.
I couldn't go lower than Back to the Future. And Back to the Future, like you're right about like the method. The method actually makes a
Yeah,
lot more sense than here. But like the actual like rules that are broken throughout like are horrible, and like that doesn't
right,
make any sense. At
right.
that, which is why I put it where it did. This one, like as far as like I guess the stuff that it breaks, it's not as bad, and it seems pretty like linear afterward. Um, but yeah, nothing about the actual origins of the time travel make any sense.
Yeah, facts.
Hmm.
All
All
right.
right. Okay,
How well does
so
it fit into the category, Joe?
how well does it fit into the category? Okay, so Nick, this may shock you. This is actually where I'm going to come down low on it. Because here's the thing. So time travel is in this movie, right? But if
Mm-mm.
I tuned into like the middle of this movie, I might not ever know that there was time travel involved in this movie, like at all. You know what I mean? Like you might not know. You might not know. Like even though it's like it's the reason why this movie's happening, like you almost never see it happen. They really don't talk about it a lot. They talk about just the future, right? And like if you're just tuning in the middle of the movie, well, like that could be happening for any number of reasons that don't have to do with time travel, right?
This is
Um,
hilarious. This is
so like
brutally hilarious. I hate you for bringing up
and
this
like
point.
I feel bad about this because like I mean, as far as where else would you draft this movie in this draft, I don't think that there is another spot that would make more sense than classic time travel. But by the same virtue, I when I think of this movie, I don't think of time travel. I think of sci-fi, right? And that isn't to say that time travel isn't sci-fi, but you know what I mean when I say that. Um,
Right.
so honestly, I'm going low here. This will probably be my lowest for category. I think it's a 2.
A 2 for category? Oh, you're a little shit. You're just trying to catch up. You're so pissed at how far ahead I am. You're such a little piece of shit. That's such a fake. Yeah, there's no way it's a 2. I'm so mad at you right now. This is ridiculous.
Give me an argument.
This is ridiculous. Well, okay, so your point makes sense. I will give you that. If you turn this movie on 5 minutes after it starts, there's not a lot more talk about time travel, and you might not ever hear, like, you might not realize it's technically a time travel film because it's a one-way trip. The one-way trip happens at the beginning, and then they spend the whole time talking about preventing a future war. Okay, great. However, we do know that it is a time travel movie. And it did come out in 1991, which, depending on who you are, I think for the most part can be considered a classic at this point in time.
No, for sure. Got no issue with that.
So that's the problem is you're ignoring the fact that you know that it is a time travel movie by giving it a 2. And that's the problem that I have. You're making a valid point, but to give it a 2 purely based off the fact that like most people, if they're going to turn on a movie halfway through, they're not going to finish it anyway, unless they've already seen it and they know what's going on. That's my main problem. So a 2 is egregious, and to counteract your 2, I'm giving it a 5. And now we've gone completely off the rails with the scoring. Completely biased.
The game is over. It doesn't make it. The integrity is gone.
The integrity of the game has been destroyed. You know what? I'm surprised it took us this many time travel draft movies to completely get the integrity out the window. Unbelievable.
Damn, that was like a rubber band. I went low and you were like, no, high.
Okay.
Amazing.
But all jokes aside, I'm going to give it a 4 for the classic category. I'm giving it a 4 because I do think that there is an argument to be made that it's not technically a classic yet, based on it coming out in 1991.
I don't agree with. Why would you say that?
Well, just from a time perspective, and it's the second one. So I think you could make a case Terminator 1 is more of a time travel classic based on the year it was released and it being the first one in the series. This being the second follow-up, I'm just saying that I think a case could be made for it not being, fitting in the category for a 5 out of 5. It's a 4 out of 5. So it's still, for me, a time travel classic, but I'm just trying to be unbiased and give the reasons for, that are reasonable reasons, Joe. This is a reasonable podcast, I thought. A 2. A 2. Unbelievable. Okay. We'll find out what our friends think online. I can't wait. Unbelievable. Anyway.
Well, we will see about that, and we'll talk about that on our next episode of May the Review be with you.
Peace.